I am Naomi, 33 years old, and I spent a decade building an empire out of the scraps my parents left me when they cut me off at 18. My spoiled sister was always treated like the star. Private schools lavish trips a brand new convertible at 23. But during our grandmother's 80th birthday dinner at a Michelin star restaurant, she thought she finally caught me in a lie. She slammed a real estate listing on the table, screaming that I had secretly bought a $4 million New York City penthouse and demanded I hand over the keys to her. She thought she had me cornered. She yelled. My father dropped his fork in shock, and my aunt said something that froze my sister in her tracks. What none of them realized was that I had not just bought a penthouse. I had bought the entire commercial building where her husband worked, and I brought my corporate attorney to dinner as my plus one. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to legally destroy the people who share your DNA just to protect your peace. Trust me, you will want to stay for the moment. My African-American brother-in-law realizes he is about to be investigated by the federal government. The crystal glasses at Le Bernardin clinked softly around us, the ambient noise of Manhattan's elite humming in the background of our private dining room. We were supposed to be celebrating Grandma Beatrice's 80th birthday. My 28-year-old sister Madison decided it was the perfect moment to stage an ambush. Madison reached into her designer handbag, pulled out a thick stack of printed papers, and slammed it right onto the center of the white linen tablecloth. The impact knocked over a salt shaker and caused the waiter pouring water to freeze in his tracks. The papers featured a brightly colored Zillow listing, a $4.5 million penthouse in Tribeca. Madison shrieked, her voice slicing through the elegant jazz music playing overhead. She pointed a perfectly manicured finger directly at my face, her eyes wide with a mix of fury and greed. You bought a $4.5 million penthouse in Tribeca and hid it from your own family. Are you planning to be selfish for the rest of your miserable life? My father Richard dropped his heavy silver fork onto his porcelain plate with a loud clatter. My mother Catherine gasped loudly, pressing her hand against her pearl necklace, as if the very concept of my financial success was a physical assault on her cardiovascular system. I did not flinch. I slowly picked up my wine glass, taking a measured sip of Cabernet before setting it down on the table. I did not hide it, Madison, I said, my voice deliberately calm and flat. It is a private real estate transaction. My assets are none of your business. And please lower your voice. You are embarrassing yourself in a Michelin star restaurant. Embarrassing myself! Madison scoffed, crossing her arms tightly over her chest. She wore a dress she definitely could not afford on her income as a lifestyle influencer, a career consisting mostly of posting photos of avocado toast and pretending to be rich. You are the embarrassment, Naomi. Jamal and I are trying to start a family. We are living in a cramped two-bedroom apartment that barely has enough closet space for my brand collaborations. And you, a single woman with zero prospects of ever finding a husband, are hoarding a 5,000-square-foot penthouse all to yourself. Catherine leaned forward, her face flushed with indignation. Your sister is absolutely right, Naomi. This is exactly why people call you cold and calculating. Madison and Jamal are trying to build a future. As the older sister, you should be stepping up to help them. You do not need all that space. You should transfer the title to Madison immediately. It is the absolute least you can do for this family after everything we have been through. I stared at my mother, letting the sheer audacity of her demand hang in the air for a long moment. Transfer the title. I repeated, a cold smile touching the corners of my mouth. Just hand over a luxury property I paid for with my own money to a sister who has never worked a 40-hour week in her life. We are family, Richard barked from the head of the table. His face was turning a dangerous shade of red. In this family, we support each other. Your sister needs a home suitable for raising children. You have more money than you need, clearly. Stop acting like a greedy outsider and do what is right. Support each other, I echoed, resting my forearms on the table. I locked eyes with my father, refusing to back down. That is a fascinating choice of words, Dad. Does supporting each other look like the time you took $80,000 out of my college fund to buy Madison a brand new convertible for her 23rd birthday? Because as I recall, your exact words to me were that I was smart and could figure out student loans, while your golden child needed a reliable vehicle for her personal brand. Madison rolled her eyes, dramatically sighing as loudly as she could. Oh my God, are we really bringing up the car again? That was 5 years ago. Get over it. I spent 5 years working 3 different jobs. I fired back, my tone icy. I waited tables and managed properties just to pay off the predatory interest rates on those loans while you were driving to the Hamptons. So no, Madison, I will absolutely not be giving you my penthouse. Go get a real job and buy one for yourself now, because I am done. The silence in the private dining room was suffocating. The waitstaff sensed the hostility, purposefully steering clear of our heavy oak doors. Madison sat back, her face contorted in pure rage. She looked frantically at our parents, expecting them to leap to her defense and force me into submission. They did not disappoint her. Catherine slammed her hand onto the table, her diamond rings clinking loudly against her wineglass. You are delusional, Naomi. You have always been prone to making up these wild, vindictive stories just to play the victim. We never took money from your college fund. That money was reallocated because your sister actually had a clear vision for her future, while you were wasting time on useless entry-level jobs. We were trying to teach you financial responsibility, and look at you now. You are successful. You should be thanking us instead of throwing these petty accusations in our faces. Thanking you, I asked, leaning forward, refusing to break eye contact with my mother. You want me to thank you for kicking me out the day I turned 18 with nothing but a garbage bag full of clothes? You want me to thank you for ignoring my calls when I was sleeping on a friend's couch because I could not afford rent and tuition at the same time? You claim you taught me financial responsibility. No, mother. You taught me that my survival meant nothing if it inconvenienced your perfect image. You taught me that Madison's luxury lifestyle was a necessity, while my basic needs were a burden to be discarded. My father, Richard, leaned over his plate, his face purple with anger. He pointed his steak knife directly at me. Do not speak to your mother that way. You have carried this ridiculous grudge for 15 years, Naomi. It is completely pathetic. We made a strategic family investment in Madison. Her influencer brand required startup capital. You were entirely capable of working your way through school. Now you are hoarding millions of dollars in luxury real estate, while your sister tries to build a family in a tiny apartment. You are a cold, ungrateful woman. We invite you to dinner and you deliberately humiliate your sister. I am not humiliating anyone, I stated flatly. I am simply refusing to be extorted by people who call themselves family. You invited me here tonight specifically because Madison found that Zillow listing. You did not invite me to celebrate Grandma Beatrice. You invited me to orchestrate a highly coordinated shakedown. You want me to hand over a $4.5 million asset because Madison wants a better backdrop for her fake internet photos. It is not going to happen today, and it is not going to happen tomorrow. Madison shrieked, slamming both her hands on the table hard enough to rattle the silverware. It is not just about photos. Jamal and I are building a legacy. We are the ones who will give mom and dad grandchildren. We are the ones carrying this family forward into the future. You are just a bitter spinster who cares more about property deeds than your own flesh and blood. You owe us this penthouse. You owe this family for raising you, feeding you, and putting a roof over your head for 18 years. I owe you absolutely nothing, I replied, my voice dropping to a deadly calm that commanded the entire room. I paid my own way. I built my own firm from the ground up. I secured my own capital. While you were taking $200,000 from mom and dad to fund your lavish destination wedding, I was working 80-hour weeks closing commercial real estate deals. You want a legacy, Madison? Try actually earning one instead of begging for mine like a spoiled child. That was when Jamal decided to intervene. Jamal is 31, an African-American financial analyst at a mid-tier firm on Wall Street. He married Madison 2 years ago, clearly under the impression he was marrying into immense generational wealth. He wore a custom-tailored charcoal suit and nervously adjusted a thick gold watch on his wrist. I knew he had financed that watch on a 36-month payment plan because my firm ran a comprehensive background check on him months ago. Jamal was obsessed with projecting an image of untouchable power. He leaned forward, steepling his fingers together, trying to look deeply intimidating. He cleared his throat, attempting to project the calm authority of a seasoned executive dealing with an unruly subordinate. Listen to me very carefully, Naomi. Jamal said, his voice dropping an octave to sound commanding. You got lucky with a few residential real estate flips, but you are playing completely out of your league here. Real wealth is built on connections, high-level Wall Street connections. You do not want to make an enemy out of me or my firm. I looked at Jamal, taking in his aggressive posture and the sheer delusion radiating from every pore of his body. The temptation to laugh right in his face was almost overpowering. You are going to threaten me right now, Jamal? I asked, raising a single arched eyebrow. It is not a threat. It is a promise, Jamal countered, leaning closer across the table until I could smell his expensive cologne. I know exactly how your industry works. I know how heavily you rely on institutional backing for your commercial acquisitions. If you do not cooperate with the family today, I can make a few discreet phone calls. I can freeze your access to institutional capital by tomorrow morning. I will personally ensure no major bank in this entire city underwrites your next project. Do not test me. You are just a lucky real estate broker. I move millions of dollars before lunch. You hand over the penthouse to me and my wife, or your little company goes bankrupt by the third quarter. It is your choice. The sheer audacity of Jamal's ultimatum hung in the stale air of the private dining room. I looked at his perfectly manicured hands, at the heavy gold watch he kept flashing under the restaurant lights, and let a slow, deliberate smile stretch across my face. I did not shrink back into my chair. I did not break eye contact. Bankrupt by the third quarter, I repeated, letting the words roll off my tongue as if I were analyzing a fascinating insect under a microscope. That is a highly specific timeline, Jamal. Tell me, does the compliance department at your financial firm know you are using their corporate weight to extort private citizens during family dinners? Or do they just actively encourage their analysts to commit federal blackmail between the appetizers and the main course? Jamal let out a sharp, condescending laugh, leaning back in his chair and unbuttoning his suit jacket to project total physical dominance. Compliance reports to people like me, Naomi. You clearly do not understand how this city works. I sit in boardrooms with managing directors who can buy and sell your entire property portfolio before they even finish their morning coffee. You are a small fish, swimming in an ocean you do not understand. I am offering you a lifeline today. Give us the penthouse, and I will make sure your little company stays afloat. Fight me, and I will make sure you never close another commercial real estate deal in Manhattan. Madison beamed at her husband, her eyes wide with total, unquestioning adoration. She reached over and squeezed his arm, completely oblivious to the fact that her husband had just confessed to attempted extortion in a public venue. You really should listen to him, Naomi. Madison said, her voice dripping with fake sugary pity. Jamal handles accounts worth hundreds of millions of dollars. He is an absolute shark on Wall Street. He is actually trying to do you a massive favor by keeping this asset transfer within the family. If you make him mad, he will crush your little real estate hobby and not even lose a single second of sleep over it. Just hand over the keys. I already have a vision board for the renovations anyway. I am thinking of knocking down the guest bedroom walls to build a walk-in closet for my brand sponsorships. A hobby, I repeated, turning my gaze from Madison to my mother. Catherine was nodding vigorously in agreement with her golden child. This is exactly what happens when you stubbornly refuse to find a capable husband to manage your affairs, Catherine lectured, pointing her crystal wineglass directly at my chest. You get completely out of your depth. You have no idea how high-level finance operates. Jamal is a certified expert in wealth management. You should be down on your knees thanking him for taking this massive property burden off your shoulders. We are giving you an easy way out, Naomi. I took another slow sip of my wine, watching them perform their synchronized delusion. My father, Richard, crossed his arms tightly across his chest, projecting the image of a deeply disappointed patriarch. The family has reached a consensus, Naomi, Richard declared, speaking as if his absurd words held actual legal binding power. The penthouse belongs to Madison and Jamal now. We will have the deed transfer papers drafted first thing on Monday morning. You will sign them, and in exchange, Jamal will graciously ensure your company is protected from market volatility. It is a win for everyone involved. Now apologize to your brother-in-law for disrespecting his authority. I set my glass down, the sharp clink cutting through their fantasy. You are all suffering from a severe, highly contagious delusion, I stated flatly. You think raising your voices and throwing around corporate buzzwords makes you powerful. Jamal, you claim you can freeze my access to institutional capital by tomorrow morning. That is fascinating. Because to do that, you would need to be a senior partner or a managing director with unilateral authority over commercial lending. But you are not a managing director, are you? You are a mid-tier analyst who spends his days updating spreadsheets for the people who actually hold the power. Jamal slammed his open palm onto the table, the sudden violence causing Madison to jump in her seat. His calm, arrogant facade slipped completely, revealing the desperate, aggressive man hiding underneath the expensive tailored suit. Do not ever disrespect my rank, Jamal snarled, his voice rising in volume as he abandoned his professional tone. You have zero idea who you are messing with. I know exactly how your firm operates, Naomi. I know you rely heavily on bridge loans and mezzanine financing to acquire those properties. I have friends at every major bank in this financial district. One phone call from me and your credit lines dry up completely. I will call in every favor I have. I will burn your business reputation to the absolute ground. You will be blacklisted from every real estate auction in the state until you are completely ruined. I watched the sweat bead on his forehead, noting the erratic pulse visible in his neck. He was pushing too hard, threatening too loudly. He was exposing his hand. You think you hold power because you wear a suit that costs more than your monthly rent, Jamal, I asked. I have dealt with actual managing partners. They do not raise their voices at dinner parties. They do not threaten women over appetizers. They execute quietly. You are loud because you are terrified. Jamal glared at me, his chest heaving. You arrogant witch. I have insider knowledge on market shifts that your little brain cannot even comprehend. My firm manages the portfolios of politicians and tech billionaires. We control the commercial sector. I can bury your company in compliance audits. I can flag your real estate group to the IRS. I can make your life an absolute living hell until you are begging me to take this penthouse off your hands. You seem incredibly obsessed with my liquidity, Jamal, I noted calmly, tilting my head to study his frantic behavior. For a man who supposedly moves millions before lunch, you seem awfully desperate to get your hands on my property right this very second. You are sweating. You are shouting. You are threatening to destroy my business over a family dinner. Are you absolutely sure you are not the one who desperately needs a financial bailout? Jamal froze. The color drained from his face, leaving him looking sickly under the warm restaurant lights. He looked frantically toward Richard, his aggressive posture deflating for a fraction of a second before he puffed his chest back out in a desperate show of bravado. Richard, handle your daughter, Jamal demanded, his voice cracking slightly. I am trying to offer her a clean, mutually beneficial exit, but my patience is completely gone. Put her in line before I take matters into my own hands and destroy her firm. Richard stood up abruptly, pushing his chair back so hard it scraped loudly against the floor. He reached down into his leather briefcase, his face twisted in absolute fury, ready to escalate this shakedown to the next level. Richard slammed a thick stack of legal documents onto the white tablecloth right next to my wine glass. The top page bore the crest of a major commercial bank. I did not flinch, simply shifting my gaze from the papers to his red face. This is a $2 million commercial loan guarantee, Richard announced, his voice echoing loudly in the private dining room. Jamal is launching his own independent financial advisory firm. He needs immediate startup capital. The bank requires a hard asset for collateral. Since you have selfishly hoarded a $4.5 million property, you are going to sign this document tonight as the primary guarantor. I looked down at the documents. I did not even need to read the fine print to know how absurd this proposition was. You want me to put up my primary residence to back a high-risk commercial loan for a man who has zero experience running his own firm? I have 10 years of Wall Street experience, Jamal snapped, aggressively adjusting his silk tie. My new firm is a guaranteed success. I already have verbal commitments from high-net-worth individuals. The bank just needs a signature to release the funds. You are not actually risking anything, Naomi. It is a pure formality, a technicality to satisfy the underwriters. A formality, I repeated, letting out a sharp, humorless laugh. If it is a pure formality, Jamal, why are you not using your own assets? Why doesn't Madison put up her assets? Oh, wait. Madison's net worth is entirely comprised of maxed-out credit cards and gifted designer bags. Shut up! Madison shrieked, her voice pitching into a hysterical frequency. You are just trying to ruin my life because you are a jealous, bitter woman. Mom, tell her to sign it. Make her sign the paper right now. Catherine reached across the table, her eyes welling with highly practiced, entirely fake tears. She placed a trembling hand over her heart. Naomi, please, stop this vicious behavior immediately. Your father and I have worked our entire lives to build a legacy for this family. We cannot liquidate our retirement accounts right now because they are tied up in complex investment vehicles. You have the liquidity, you have the physical asset. If you love us, if you have any basic respect for the family that gave you life, you will pick up a pen and sign that contract. Do not destroy your sister's future over a petty grudge. You gave me life, Catherine, and then you gave me an eviction notice on my 18th birthday. I fired back, my voice completely devoid of emotion. I paid my own rent. I paid my own tuition. I built my own firm. My assets belong to my holding company, not to you, and certainly not to Jamal. Your emotional manipulation is completely useless. Richard slammed his fist on the table again, causing Grandma Beatrice's water glass to shake. You ungrateful brat, I am your father. I am the patriarch of this family. I am ordering you to sign the guarantee. If you refuse to support your sister and your brother-in-law today, you are completely cut off. You will be disowned. I will erase your name from the family trust. I will make sure every relative we have knows you abandoned your pregnant sister when she needed you most. You will never be welcome in our home at our holidays, or in our lives ever again. You sign this paper right now or you are dead to us. The sheer lack of self-awareness was staggering. I looked at the man who had happily spent my college savings on a luxury car for his favorite daughter, now threatening to disown the daughter who had already survived without him for 15 years. Disown me? I asked, my voice deadly calm. Dad, you cannot disown someone who already walked away. You cut me off financially a decade and a half ago. I survived. I thrived. I built a multi-million-dollar real estate investment firm while you coddled Madison into a state of absolute financial dependency. Your threat means absolutely nothing to me. Jamal leaned forward, his arrogance returning in a desperate, ugly wave. You think this is a game, Naomi? You think you can just walk away from this table? The bank needs that collateral by Monday morning. If I do not get this funding, my entire business plan collapses. If my business plan collapses, I am going to make it my personal mission to ensure your firm faces intense regulatory scrutiny. I know people at the SEC. I know aggressive auditors. I will drown your LLC in so much red tape you will be begging to sign this house over to me just to make it stop. I finally reached out and pulled the contract toward me. I flipped to the second page, scanning the financial terms. The interest rate was incredibly predatory, a clear sign that whatever bank drafted this considered Jamal a massive liability. But something else caught my eye immediately. The lending institution was a secondary subsidiary, not a Tier 1 bank. This was a lender of absolute last resort. Jamal, I said, tapping the heavy paper with my manicured finger. This is a high-yield mezzanine loan from a secondary lender. Tier 1 banks rejected your application entirely, did they not? You did not go to Chase or Goldman Sachs because your credit profile is a complete disaster. You are trying to secure $2 million at an 18% interest rate, and you want to strap that ticking financial time bomb directly to my penthouse. Jamal's jaw clenched tight. Heavy sweat was visibly forming on his brow. It is a short-term bridge loan. It is strictly temporary until the client funds clear the escrow accounts. It is financial suicide. I corrected him sharply, holding his completely terrified gaze. And I am not going down with your sinking ship. Madison slammed her hands against the edge of the table, pushing herself up from her chair. Her face contorted into a mask of pure indignation. How dare you speak to my husband like that? Madison shrieked, her voice echoing off the private dining room walls. Jamal is building an empire. You are trying to tear him down because you are miserable. You sit alone in your giant apartment every night with absolutely nobody to share it with. You are insanely jealous of my life, Naomi. You are jealous that I have a loving husband, a beautiful home, and a thriving career that people actually care about. I slowly turned my head, shifting my focus away from Jamal's sweating face to look directly at my sister. The sheer delusion radiating from her was almost fascinating to witness. A thriving career, I repeated, keeping my voice dangerously level. You consider posting photographs of avocado toast and free skincare samples to be a thriving career. I am a lifestyle influencer, Madison snapped, flipping her perfectly styled blonde hair over her shoulder. I have brand partnerships. I have an audience. I cultivate an aesthetic that inspires hundreds of thousands of people every single day. My platform generates actual cultural value, unlike your boring real estate contracts. I am building a brand that will sustain my family for decades. I let out a soft, humorless laugh. It is funny you bring up your brand, Madison, because when Jamal demanded that I hand over my penthouse, I naturally felt obligated to do some basic due diligence on the two people attempting to extort me. When someone asks me to assume $2 million of risk, I verify their liquidity. So I had my corporate team run a comprehensive background check on both of you. Madison crossed her arms tightly over her chest, jutting her chin out in a display of false bravado. Go ahead. Tell everyone how successful my engagement metrics are. I have absolutely nothing to hide. Catherine nodded vigorously from across the table, eager to defend her golden child. Madison makes six figures easily, Naomi. She receives PR packages from top-tier designers every week. She just booked a luxury trip to the Amalfi Coast next month. Her success is highly visible to anyone who actually pays attention to modern business. You simply do not understand the digital economy. I looked at my mother with a mixture of pity and absolute disdain. The digital economy, I said, leaning back in my chair. Let us talk about Madison's digital economy. Mother, do you genuinely believe your favorite daughter earns six figures? Because according to the verified financial profiles my team pulled, Madison's lifestyle brand generated exactly $14,650 in gross revenue last year. The entire table froze. Richard frowned, looking from me to Madison. That is impossible, Richard argued, his voice losing some of its aggressive edge. She just bought a Chanel bag that costs more than $10,000. We see her lifestyle. She is clearly generating massive income. She is not generating income, Dad, I corrected him sharply. She is generating debt. Massive, catastrophic, unrecoverable debt. Madison's face drained of all color. She dropped her arms to her sides, her false confidence completely shattering. Shut your mouth, Naomi. Madison hissed, her voice suddenly shaking. You are making things up to make me look bad in front of Grandma Beatrice. I did not even look at Grandma Beatrice, keeping my eyes locked on my sister. I am not making anything up, Madison. Your entire life is a carefully curated lie. You bought your Instagram followers using an offshore click farm. Your engagement metrics are completely artificial. And to maintain this pathetic illusion of wealth, you have been funding your lifestyle on borrowed plastic. That is a complete lie. Madison cried out, looking desperately at our parents. She is lying. Mom, she is trying to destroy my marriage. Jamal, tell them she is lying. But Jamal did not defend her. He sat frozen in his chair, staring at Madison with a look of absolute horror. He clearly believed he had married a woman with an endless trust fund. He had no idea his wife was digging a financial grave right next to his own. I am not lying, and you all know it, I stated, cutting through Madison's fake sobs. Every luxury trip, every designer outfit, every extravagant dinner you post online is funded by credit cards you can never pay back. You want specifics. You currently owe $45,000 to American Express. You owe $60,000 to Chase Sapphire. You owe another $45,000 on a Discover card. You are sitting in a Michelin star restaurant wearing a designer dress while drowning in exactly $150,000 of high-interest credit card debt. You are completely insolvent, Madison. Catherine gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. She stared at Madison, her eyes wide with shock. Madison, tell me she is lying. Tell me you do not have $150,000 in debt. Madison burst into loud, theatrical tears, burying her face in her hands. You came here tonight expecting to guilt me into handing over my penthouse so you could liquidate it and save yourselves, I said. You called me selfish. You said I was ungrateful. But I am the only person at this table who actually knows the value of a dollar. I turned my gaze back to Jamal, whose face was slick with terrified sweat. Now, Jamal, I said softly, let us get back to your brilliant plan to destroy my real estate firm. Because I think it is time we discuss exactly why you are so desperate for a $2 million commercial loan. Jamal shifted his weight, his custom suit suddenly looking like a straitjacket. He grabbed his crystal water glass, his hands trembling so violently that water sloshed over the rim and onto the crisp white tablecloth. He swallowed hard, trying to summon back the arrogant Wall Street persona he had worn just 10 minutes ago. You do not know what you are talking about, Jamal said, though his voice lacked any real conviction. My business plan is completely solid. I am securing capital for an elite wealth management firm. It is a standard operational procedure. You are trying to deflect from Madison's spending habits to save your own face. I smiled, leaning forward and resting my elbows on the table. An elite wealth management firm. That is a brilliant cover story, Jamal. It truly is. It sounds prestigious. It sounds like the logical next step for a rising star at Apex Financial. But we both know there is absolutely no new firm. There are no high net worth clients lining up to hand you their portfolios. You are not trying to build an empire. You are trying to buy your way out of a federal indictment. Richard frowned, looking frantically between me and his son-in-law. Federal indictment. Naomi, what kind of ridiculous accusation is this? Jamal is a senior analyst. He has a spotless record at his company. I had a spotless record. Dad, I corrected him, keeping my eyes locked on Jamal. Until approximately 3 weeks ago. Tell them, Jamal. Tell your loving, supportive in-laws exactly why you have been sitting in downtown coffee shops from 9 to 5 every single day instead of going into the office. Tell them why your corporate email account was abruptly deactivated last Tuesday morning. Jamal's face flushed a deep, panicked ashen color. I am on administrative leave, he stammered, his eyes darting toward the restaurant doors as if calculating the distance for a quick escape. It is a routine internal audit. Everyone goes through it. It is a completely standard compliance protocol. Standard compliance protocol does not involve the Securities and Exchange Commission. I fired back, my voice razor sharp. Standard compliance protocol does not result in your access badges being revoked and security escorting you out of the building in front of your entire trading floor. Madison stopped crying long enough to look at her husband. Her tear-streaked face twisted in utter confusion. Jamal. What is she saying? You told me you were working from home to finalize the pitch deck for the new company. He lied to you, Madison, I said, almost feeling a brief flash of pity before remembering her earlier viciousness. Your husband is not starting a business. He is desperately trying to secure a $2 million commercial loan to quietly reimburse Apex Financial before they turn his file over to the federal authorities for criminal prosecution. Catherine let out a sharp gasp, clutching Richard's arm tightly. This is a complete fabrication, Richard bellowed, standing up from his chair. Jamal is a financial genius. He handles massive accounts. He definitely handled them. I agreed smoothly. Right into the ground. Let me explain exactly what your financial genius of a son-in-law has been doing. Jamal, please correct me if any of my details are inaccurate. About 4 months ago, you realized Madison's credit card debt was spiraling completely out of control. You needed cash fast to maintain the wealthy image you both so desperately craved. So you decided to play God with your client's money. You engaged in highly leveraged, unauthorized margin trading. Jamal squeezed his eyes shut, shaking his head. Stop. Just stop talking right now. No, I think the family deserves to know the brilliant strategy behind your financial demands. I continued relentlessly. For those who do not understand Wall Street terminology, margin trading essentially means borrowing money from a broker to purchase stock. It is incredibly risky. But Jamal did not use his own money. He used client funds to guarantee highly speculative options trades, hoping to pocket the massive yields and quietly put the original funds back before anyone noticed his actions. The private dining room was so silent you could hear the faint hum of the air conditioning. My parents stared at Jamal, waiting for him to erupt to scream that it was a lie to threaten me with a massive defamation lawsuit. But Jamal just stared at his lap, looking exactly like a man marching toward the gallows. The problem with highly leveraged options, I said, enjoying the absolute terror radiating from his side of the table, is that when the market turns against you, the losses are catastrophic. The trades went bad. You received a margin call you could not cover. And by the time the compliance officers at Apex Financial flagged the unauthorized transactions, you had vaporized $850,000 of client capital. Oh my God, Madison whispered, her hands covering her mouth. Jamal, tell me this is a nightmare. Tell me she is lying to us. Jamal finally looked up, his eyes wild and deeply defensive. I was going to fix it, he shouted, slamming his fist on the heavy wooden table. The market acted irrationally. It was a temporary dip. If compliance had just given me another 48 hours, the positions would have rebounded completely. I could have made the money back. But they did not give you 48 hours, did they? I asked coldly. They suspended you. They launched a full forensic audit. And they gave you a strict ultimatum. You either replace the missing $850,000 and pay the massive corporate fines, or they hand you over to the feds for embezzlement and wire fraud. That is why you need $2 million right now. You need to pay back the firm, cover the penalties, and have enough left over to maintain the illusion that you voluntarily quit to start your own business. The absolute silence that followed my statement was shattered by a piercing, guttural scream from Madison. She shoved her chair back so violently it toppled over, crashing against the heavy mahogany paneling of the private dining room. The fine china rattled, and a waiter who had been hovering near the service door practically sprinted in the opposite direction. You are a liar! Madison shrieked, her voice cracking under the sheer force of her hysteria. She pointed a trembling, manicured finger directly at my face, her chest heaving as she struggled to draw breath. You made all of this up. You hired investigators to fabricate fake financial reports just to humiliate us in front of Grandma Beatrice. You cannot stand the fact that Jamal is successful, that he loves me, that we have a perfect life, while you sleep alone in some empty penthouse. Jamal reached out, grabbing Madison's wrist in a desperate attempt to pull her back down. Madison, please lower your voice. Sit down. We can figure this out. I can explain the margin calls. But Madison violently yanked her arm away from her husband, her eyes blazing with absolute denial. Do not let her intimidate you, Jamal. She is a miserable, jealous spinster. She has always been jealous of me because Mom and Dad actually loved me, and they threw her out the second she turned 18. She wants to see me fail so she can feel better about her own pathetic, lonely existence. I simply watched her meltdown, feeling absolutely nothing. The contrast between her designer gown and her completely unhinged behavior was striking. I do not need to fabricate federal violations, Madison. I replied, my voice slicing through her tantrum with cold precision. The Securities and Exchange Commission does not take requests from jealous sisters. Your husband committed a massive financial crime. Your credit cards are completely maxed out. Your perfect life is an illusion built on stolen client funds and high-interest debt. Stop talking to her like that, Catherine shrieked, slamming her napkin onto the table and rushing to Madison's side. She wrapped her arms tightly around her golden child, glaring at me with a level of hatred that was almost breathtaking. You are a monster, Naomi. A cold, calculating monster. You invited your own family to a birthday dinner just to launch this vicious, unprovoked attack on your sister's marriage. I did not invite you to dinner to attack anyone, Mother, I corrected her firmly. You invited me to this dinner. You staged this entire gathering specifically to force me into signing over a $4.5 million asset. You brought commercial loan documents to a restaurant. You attempted an organized financial shakedown. I simply arrived prepared. Because you are a stain on this family's name, Catherine screamed. Her face flushed dark red, completely abandoning any pretense of upper-class dignity. We raised you with everything you ever needed, and you grew up into a vindictive, ruthless snake. Madison is a beautiful, loving wife who is trying to build a future. Jamal made a simple calculation error at work. A tiny mistake that any high-level financial executive could make during a stressful quarter. You have the money to fix this instantly, but instead, you choose to sit there and gloat over their temporary misfortune. A calculation error. I raised an eyebrow, looking at my mother in genuine disbelief. He illegally gambled $850,000 of other people's money and lost it all. That is not a calculation error, that is grand larceny. And your solution to this felony is for me to mortgage my primary residence at an 18% interest rate. Richard stepped forward, his fists clenched tightly at his sides. He positioned himself between me and his favorite daughter, acting as the protective patriarch defending his family against an outside threat. You listen to me, Naomi. I do not care what Jamal did or did not do at his firm. Corporate politics are cutthroat, and sometimes aggressive risks are required to achieve greatness. If his firm lacks the stomach for true Wall Street strategy, that is their problem. But you are going to solve this family crisis right now. I am not solving anything, Dad, I stated evenly. You will sign the loan guarantee, Richard roared, his voice booming across the dining table. You will put up that penthouse and you will secure Jamal's exit strategy. We are your parents. We command respect. You owe your entire existence to us. And if you think you can just walk away and let your sister's husband face a federal indictment, you are severely underestimating my authority in this family. Your authority, I repeated, letting out a sharp laugh. You have zero authority over me, Richard. You lost your parental authority the night you packed my belongings into trash bags and changed the locks on the front door because I refused to co-sign a loan for your failing business ventures 15 years ago. You threw me to the wolves and now you are absolutely furious that I returned leading the pack. Madison burst into loud theatrical tears, burying her face against Catherine's shoulder. Mom, make her stop. She is ruining everything. My entire brand will be destroyed if Jamal goes to prison. My followers will find out. The sponsorships will cancel my contracts. You have to make her sign the papers. Do not worry, sweetheart. Catherine cooed, stroking Madison's hair while shooting venomous glares in my direction. Your sister is just throwing a tantrum to negotiate better terms. She is deeply insecure and desperate for our attention. She will sign the papers because she knows deep down that she needs this family to validate her pathetic little real estate company. My pathetic little real estate company. I echoed, my smile slowly fading into a look of absolute unforgiving steel. That is an incredibly interesting assessment, Mother, because that pathetic little company has grown significantly in the past few weeks. Jamal swallowed hard, his eyes darting toward the documents still resting near my plate. His breathing was shallow, rapid, indicating an impending panic attack. What did you do? Naomi, Jamal asked, his voice trembling uncontrollably. What else did your investigators find? I did not look at Jamal. I looked directly at my father, who was still standing tall, still completely convinced he could bully me into submission through sheer volume and parental demands. They thought this was the peak of the conflict. They thought my refusal to sign the loan guarantee was the ultimate weapon I had brought to the table. They had absolutely no idea that the real destruction had not even started yet. I simply turned my head toward the quiet man sitting beside me. David Thorne had been nursing his espresso for the past 45 minutes. He wore a bespoke charcoal suit that exuded quiet authority, his posture relaxed but relentlessly observant. He had watched my family scream, threaten, and melt down with the detached fascination of a scientist observing a highly predictable experiment. Dad, Mom, Madison, and Jamal, I said, my voice cutting through the heavy tension in the private dining room. You assumed I brought a date to this little ambush. I did not. Allow me to formally introduce David Thorne. He is the lead corporate counsel for my real estate investment firm. And unlike Jamal, David actually holds the power to freeze assets and end careers. Richard stared at David, his mouth opening and closing like a landed fish. Catherine clutched her napkin, her eyes darting between me and the lawyer in sheer panic. David set his espresso cup down on the pristine white saucer. The soft clink echoed like a gavel striking a sound block. He unbuttoned his suit jacket, leaned forward, and folded his hands neatly on the table. Good evening, David said. His voice was smooth, cultured, and entirely devoid of the emotional hysteria my family was so accustomed to weaponizing. It is truly fascinating to finally meet the people Naomi has described to me. I must admit, witnessing this attempted financial extortion firsthand is far more educational than reading about it in a legal brief. Extortion! Richard bellowed, his face flushing a deep crimson again. He pointed a trembling finger at David. Who the hell do you think you are? This is a private family dinner. You have absolutely no right to be here, and you have no right to interfere in family business. Get out before I call the restaurant manager and have you removed by security. David did not blink. He did not raise his voice. He simply reached into his own sleek leather briefcase resting by his chair and pulled out a stack of documents bearing the official seal of my holding company. I am here under direct capacity as Naomi's legal representation, David replied, sliding the documents onto the table. And I strongly advise you to lower your voice, Richard. Because what you call family business, the United States federal government calls a conspiracy to commit wire fraud and bank fraud. Jamal visibly recoiled, pressing himself so hard against the back of his chair that the wood creaked in protest. Madison looked frantically from Jamal to David, her manicured hands trembling violently in her lap. Fraud. Catherine shrieked, her pearls practically vibrating against her chest. How dare you? My husband is a respected businessman. We are simply asking our selfish daughter to provide a temporary commercial bridge loan for her brother-in-law. It is a standard practice among wealthy families. There is absolutely nothing standard about this. David countered, his tone perfectly even. He picked up the commercial loan guarantee Richard had slammed down earlier and held it up to the light. Let us review this document you brought to an 80th birthday dinner. You are demanding that my client encumber a fully paid-off $4.5 million primary residence to secure a high-yield secondary loan. A loan that is explicitly designed to quietly replace $850,000 of misappropriated client funds before the Securities and Exchange Commission formally indicts Jamal for unauthorized margin trading. You cannot prove that, Jamal whispered, his voice cracking. He looked physically ill, the arrogant Wall Street persona completely stripped away. Those internal compliance audits are strictly confidential corporate matters. They are confidential, right up until they become evidence in a federal subpoena. Jamal, David corrected him effortlessly. Naomi's firm conducts rigorous background checks on any individual attempting to leverage her assets. When she received wind of your financial demands, I personally contacted a colleague at the Regulatory Oversight Board. Your file is no longer just an internal HR matter at Apex Financial. It has been flagged for federal review. Your career on Wall Street is completely over. The only question remaining is whether you will be serving time in a minimum security federal prison or a medium security facility. Madison let out a sharp, breathless gasp. She looked at Jamal, waiting for him to deny it, waiting for him to unleash his supposed Wall Street power. But Jamal just stared at the tablecloth, his chest heaving with silent panic. The realization hit Madison like a physical blow. Her husband was not a financial shark. He was a sinking ship, and he was dragging her down with him into absolute ruin. "You set us up!" Richard snarled, turning his furious gaze back to me. "You brought a corporate lawyer to a family dinner just to humiliate us. You planned this entire spectacle, Naomi. I planned to protect my assets," I stated, my voice echoing the cold authority of my attorney. "You planned to rob me blind. You brought a loan guarantee to a birthday party, Dad. You tried to exploit the presence of Grandma Beatrice to force my hand. You thought I would just cave under the pressure of your collective screaming. But I am not the terrified 18-year-old girl you threw out onto the street. I am the CEO of a multi-million-dollar enterprise. I do not cave. I litigate." I reached out and placed my hand firmly on the $2 million commercial loan guarantee. With a slow, deliberate motion, I pushed the fraudulent document across the smooth linen tablecloth until it bumped against Richard's water glass. "I am not signing your loan," I declared, holding my father's furious gaze without a single ounce of fear. "I am not bailing Jamal out of his felony charges. I am not funding Madison's fake influencer lifestyle, and I am certainly not allowing you to manipulate my financial portfolio to cover up your own catastrophic failures in parenting." Catherine burst into tears, covering her face with her linen napkin. She was not crying for me. She was crying because the illusion of her perfect family was shattering in a highly public setting. "You have ruined everything, Naomi. You have destroyed your sister's future. How can you be so utterly heartless?" "Heartless is kicking a teenager out of her home because she refused to take out predatory loans for your failing business," I reminded her, feeling absolutely zero sympathy for her theatrical weeping. "Heartless is stealing from my college fund to buy a luxury car for the daughter who happened to fit your aesthetic requirements. I am not heartless, Mother. I am simply immune to your manipulation." David Thorne leaned back in his chair, straightening his silk tie. Now that we have firmly established that my client will not be participating in your fraudulent bailout scheme, I need to make the legal boundaries incredibly clear. If any of you attempt to contact Naomi regarding this loan again, I will file an immediate restraining order for harassment. If you attempt to forge her signature, I will personally ensure the district attorney prosecutes you to the fullest extent of the law. You have zero leverage here. You have zero power over her. Richard stood up, breathing heavily. He looked like a cornered animal, desperate and dangerous. He opened his mouth to shout another threat, another demand for respect, but I cut him off before he could even form the words. "Sit down, Dad," I commanded. It was not a request. It was an absolute directive. You think my refusal to sign this loan is the worst thing that is going to happen to you tonight. You think Jamal's federal investigation is the peak of your problems, but you are vastly underestimating the situation. I watched the sheer confusion spread across their faces. They had played all their cards. They had thrown their best threats, their loudest screams, their most aggressive emotional blackmail. They had absolutely nothing left in their arsenal. "David," I said, not taking my eyes off my terrified brother-in-law, "please show Jamal the commercial property acquisition file we finalized last Thursday." David retrieved a leather-bound portfolio bearing my company logo stamped in gold foil from his briefcase. He slid it across the tablecloth, letting it stop directly against Jamal's water glass. Jamal stared at the dark leather as if it were a live explosive. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely grip the cover to flip it open. Madison leaned over his shoulder, her brow furrowed in deep confusion. She clearly lacked the financial literacy to comprehend the complex legal jargon printed on the first page, but Jamal understood it immediately. I watched his brain process the address printed at the top of the acquisition summary. All the air left his lungs in one jagged gasp. He dropped the portfolio as if the paper burned his fingers, looking at me with pure horror. "You recognize the address, do you not?" Jamal, I asked with icy precision. 128 Financial Boulevard. A prime piece of commercial real estate in the heart of the financial district. Excellent views, premium amenities, and a very impressive roster of corporate tenants. "What is this?" Richard demanded, snatching the portfolio from his trembling hands. He scanned the document. "This is a commercial deed of sale. You just bought an office building. So what? Does this prove you have more money to hoard while your sister suffers?" "It proves that Jamal is a very poor researcher," I corrected my father smoothly. Earlier tonight, Jamal confidently claimed I was just a lucky residential broker playing out of my league. He threatened to call his friends at major banks to freeze my access to institutional capital. What Jamal failed to research was the actual structure of my firm. My holding company does not flip residential houses, Dad. We specialize in aggressive commercial acquisitions. We buy premium office spaces, manage corporate tenant leases, and restructure building assets. And last Thursday, after 6 months of intense negotiations, my firm officially closed the acquisition on 128 Financial Boulevard. I paused, letting my eyes sweep across my mother, my father, and Madison, before landing squarely back on Jamal. "For those of you not intimately familiar with Wall Street real estate," I continued, 128 Financial Boulevard is the primary headquarters of Apex Financial. It is the very firm where Jamal is currently employed, suspended and under federal investigation. Madison let out a sharp, confused breath. "Wait," she stammered, looking from me to her terrified husband. "What does that mean?" "She bought your office building." "It means she is the landlord," Jamal whispered, his voice cracking horribly. He could not tear his eyes away from the legal seal on the documents. "She literally owns the entire building." "I own the building," I confirmed, giving him a razor-sharp smile. "And not just as a passive investor. My firm operates as the primary property management entity, which brings us to a very interesting intersection of our professional lives, Jamal. You see, Apex Financial currently occupies floors 12 through 20. They are an anchor tenant, but their master lease is set to expire in exactly 45 days. For the past 3 weeks, the managing partners at Apex have been desperately trying to renegotiate a 5-year lease extension with my legal team." Richard dropped the portfolio onto the table, his face draining of its angry red color, replaced by a sickly pale hue. He was a businessman. He finally understood the absolute leverage I was holding. Jamal threatened to call his managing directors and instruct them to destroy my firm. I told my father, never breaking my calm composure. But the reality is that Jamal's managing directors have been calling my office every single morning begging for favorable lease terms so they do not have to relocate their entire operation and incur millions in moving expenses. The people Jamal claims answer to him are currently answering directly to me. I hold the keys to their corporate headquarters. I dictate their overhead costs. I control their physical business operations. Catherine gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles turning stark white. Naomi, she gasped, trying to force a maternal tone of reason into her panicked voice. Naomi, surely you can use this connection. If you are the landlord, you can talk to his bosses. You can fix this entire investigation. You can tell them to drop the margin trading charges against Jamal and reinstate him. You have the power to save your sister's marriage right now. I looked at my mother with genuine disgust. Save her marriage, I asked her sharply. You want me to leverage a multi-million-dollar commercial real estate negotiation to blackmail a financial firm into dropping federal felony charges against a rogue analyst. That is not just unethical, mother. That is criminal obstruction. But more importantly, I have absolutely no desire to save a man who spent this entire evening threatening to ruin my life. Naomi, please, Jamal begged, his arrogance completely evaporating into pathetic desperation. He leaned across the table, clasping his hands together like he was praying to me. You do not understand the pressure I am under. Apex is looking for a scapegoat. If you just talk to the senior partners, if you just hint that a favorable lease extension might be contingent on them handling my audit internally instead of involving the SEC, I will be clear. I will owe you my life. I will never cross you again. You already crossed me, Jamal. I replied, my voice dropping to a low, lethal register. You sat at this table and told me you were going to burn my reputation to the ground. You tried to extort a $4.5 million property out of me to cover up your own massive financial crimes. You treated me like an ignorant pawn in your pathetic scheme. You do not get to threaten to destroy my empire and then beg me to use that exact same empire to save you from federal prison. David Thorne did not even wait for Jamal to finish absorbing my refusal. Moving with the practiced efficiency of a man who destroys corporate entities for a living, my attorney reached back into his leather portfolio. He extracted a single sheet of heavy bond paper distinctively bordered with red legal binding tape and placed it directly on top of the acquisition summary, currently sitting in front of my brother-in-law. What is this? Jamal choked out. His voice was a thin, raspy wheeze. He stared at the red border as if it were coated in venom. He did not want to touch it, keeping his trembling hands firmly planted on his own thighs. That, Jamal, is a formal notice of commercial lease termination. I stated, my voice echoing clearly against the acoustic paneling of the private dining room. Issued directly by my holding company to the managing partners of Apex Financial. It was delivered via certified courier to their executive board members precisely at 5 o'clock this afternoon. Richard slammed his fist against the table again, though the impact was considerably weaker than his previous attempts at intimidation. You cannot just evict a massive Wall Street firm, Naomi. Commercial leases are locked in for years. You are bluffing. You are trying to scare this boy, but you have no legal grounds to terminate a multi-million-dollar corporate lease. I smiled warmly at my father, savoring the absolute lack of financial literacy he was displaying. You are incorrect, Dad. High-tier commercial real estate leases, especially those involving financial institutions in Manhattan, contain extremely strict compliance and regulatory covenants. We require our tenants to maintain absolute regulatory standing to protect the integrity and reputation of our buildings. I turned my attention back to Jamal, who was currently looking like he might physically vomit onto his empty dinner plate. Tell them about the morality clause, David, I instructed my attorney. David adjusted his perfectly knotted tie. Section 4, Paragraph 12 of the Master Lease Agreement explicitly states that any formal investigation by the Securities and Exchange Commission into the tenant firm, specifically regarding the misappropriation of client funds or gross financial negligence, constitutes an immediate material breach of contract. Because Jamal engaged in unauthorized margin trading and triggered an SEC inquiry, Apex Financial is now in direct violation of their lease terms. Jamal stared at David with wide, unblinking eyes. You evicted my firm. he whispered, the reality crashing down on him with the force of a freight train. You evicted an entire financial institution because of my audit. I did not evict them because of your audit, Jamal, I corrected him sharply. I evicted them because they failed to properly supervise a mid-level analyst who decided to play casino games with $850,000 of other people's money. However, in the termination notice, my legal team was incredibly specific about the exact reason for the breach of contract. The executive board at Apex Financial now knows that they are losing their prestigious corporate headquarters, incurring millions in relocation costs, and facing massive logistical disruptions entirely because of you. Madison let out a high-pitched wail, grabbing her husband by the arm and shaking him. Jamal, what does this mean? Tell me what this means for us. It means, I answered for him, watching the utter despair swallow Jamal whole, that your husband is no longer just facing a federal indictment and prison time. When the partners at Apex Financial realized that Jamal's reckless behavior cost them their offices and triggered a breach of contract, they are not just going to fire him. They are going to sue him civilly for the total cost of their relocation, the lost business revenue, and the damage to their corporate reputation. They are going to freeze every single asset he has ever touched. They will drain his accounts to pay their legal fees before the federal prosecutors even finish drafting his arrest warrant. Jamal buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking violently. He let out a ragged sob, the arrogant, threatening Wall Street persona completely eradicated. He was just a terrified man who had gambled everything on a lie and lost spectacularly. No, Madison shrieked, bolting up from her chair and lunging toward my side of the table. She pointed a furious finger at my attorney. You tear that paper up right now. You withdraw that notice. You cannot do this to us. We are family. Naomi, you tell your lawyer to cancel the eviction. You tell him to fix this right now, or I swear I will ruin you. David did not even flinch as Madison screamed in his face. He simply looked at her with clinical detachment. The notice has already been legally served and filed, ma'am. It cannot be withdrawn, and threatening opposing counsel in front of multiple witnesses is a remarkably poor legal strategy. I highly advise you to sit down and remain silent. Catherine stood up, her face streaked with mascara tears. She rushed over to wrap her arms around Madison, pulling her golden child back to her side of the table. Naomi, how could you be so malicious? Catherine sobbed, glaring at me with raw hatred. You orchestrated this entire scenario just to destroy your sister's happiness. You waited until your grandmother's birthday dinner to drop this bomb on us. You are truly a wicked, spiteful girl. We never should have invited you here. You did not invite me to celebrate Grandma Beatrice. I reminded my mother, keeping my voice absolutely devoid of sympathy. You invited me to orchestrate a financial ambush. You brought commercial loan documents to the table and tried to bully me into signing over a $4.5 million asset. You screamed at me, insulted my career, and threatened to disown me. I simply defended myself using the exact same corporate landscape Jamal threatened to weaponize against me. You played a high-stakes game and you lost. Richard pointed a shaking finger at David. You are fired, Richard yelled at my attorney, completely abandoning logic. You are fired from representing my daughter. I forbid you from processing any more paperwork against this family. Get out of my sight. David offered a polite, totally unaffected smile. I am retained by Naomi's corporate entity, Richard. You hold no executive authority over her firm, her assets, or her legal representation. You cannot fire me, and you certainly cannot forbid me from executing my fiduciary duties. I strongly suggest you direct your anger toward the man who actually committed the federal offenses, rather than the woman defending her property. Jamal finally lifted his head from his hands. His eyes were red, completely devoid of the aggressive spark he had carried into the restaurant. He looked broken, defeated, and utterly desperate. Naomi, please, Jamal begged, his voice a pathetic whimper. I have nothing left. The firm will take everything. I will go to prison. I will be ruined. Please, I will sign whatever you want. I will apologize. I will publicly admit I lied. Just retract the notice. Just tell them you made a mistake. Give me a chance to survive this. I looked at the man who had spent the last hour threatening to destroy my entire livelihood, and I felt a profound sense of closure. I picked up my expensive wine glass, taking a final unhurried sip. You are not going to survive this, Jamal, I stated with absolute finality, watching him completely, utterly crumble. Your career is over. Your finances are obliterated forever. You dug this massive, inescapable grave with your own sheer, unadulterated arrogance, and now you get to lie in it permanently. Richard let out a sudden, deafening roar that violently shook the crystal water glasses on the table. The veneer of the composed, wealthy patriarch completely vanished in a fraction of a second, replaced by a man backed into a corner and stripped of his perceived authority. He lunged across the heavy wooden table, his arms knocking over a woven basket of artisan bread and sending an expensive wine glass shattering into a dozen pieces onto the polished hardwood floor. He grabbed the formal notice of commercial lease termination and the acquisition portfolio right out from under Jamal's trembling hands. "I will not allow this!" Richard screamed, his face a terrifying shade of crimson. He gripped the heavy bond paper and began ripping it in half, then into quarters, throwing the shredded pieces aggressively onto the table. "You think a piece of paper gives you the right to destroy this family? I am your father. I built this family. I dictate what happens here. You will not humiliate your sister. You will not ruin your brother-in-law. I will destroy every single document you bring into this room until you learn your place and show some respect." I did not move a single muscle. I did not flinch when the glass broke, and I certainly did not try to stop him from throwing his childish temper tantrum. I simply looked at David Thorne. My attorney casually brushed a stray piece of torn paper off his tailored sleeve. He looked at my father with the kind of clinical disgust usually reserved for a deeply unpleasant insect. "Are you quite finished, Richard?" David asked, his calm voice cutting right through my father's heavy, ragged breathing. Because while watching a grown man throw a violent tantrum in a Michelin star restaurant is highly entertaining, I am legally obligated to inform you that you have just committed a severe federal offense. Richard froze his fists, still clutching the crumpled remains of the portfolio cover. "What are you talking about?" he spat, though his voice wavered slightly, the adrenaline quickly giving way to uncertainty. "It is just paper. I am protecting my family from a vindictive attack. I have every right to stop this nonsense." "You are actively tampering with evidence tied to an ongoing federal investigation," David corrected him smoothly, picking up his espresso cup again. "That notice of lease termination is directly linked to the Securities and Exchange Commission inquiry into Jamal's unauthorized margin trading. By physically destroying those documents in a stated attempt to prevent their execution, you have just crossed the line into obstruction of justice. Furthermore, those were merely courtesy copies. The originals are safely secured in a digital corporate vault and have already been legally filed with the necessary agencies. You achieved absolutely nothing tonight, except providing me with multiple reliable witnesses to your felony evidence tampering." Catherine let out a horrified shriek, rushing around the table to Richard's side and pulling frantically at his arm. "Richard, stop it. Put it down right now." She turned her venom back on David, her eyes wide with panic. "How dare you threaten my husband with federal charges? He is a desperate father trying to keep his family together. He is acting out of love and loyalty. You and Naomi provoked him into this state of distress. Any judge would understand that a father was just trying to protect his children from a vicious corporate assault. A judge would understand that a grown man tried to use physical intimidation because his emotional blackmail completely failed." I fired back, my voice ringing with absolute authority. "Do not try to rebrand his lack of self-control as fatherly love, mother. He is not ripping up documents out of loyalty. He is ripping them up because he is terrified. He is terrified because for the first time in 33 years, he cannot control the narrative, and he cannot control me." I looked at the shredded paper scattered among the expensive silverware and spilled red wine. "You always used your size and your volume to get your way, Dad. I remember when I was 16 and I asked to see the bank statements for my college savings account. You screamed at me for being disrespectful. You threw a coffee mug at the wall and grounded me for a month. I thought you were just demanding respect. It took me years to realize you resorted to anger because you were hiding the fact that you had already drained that account to pay for your own terrible real estate investments." "Shut your mouth!" Richard snarled, stepping back from the table. His chest heaved as he tried to regain some semblance of dignity, straightening his expensive silk tie with shaking hands. "You have no idea the intense pressures I was under to keep this family afloat. Every financial decision I ever made was for the greater good of this household. I provided a luxury lifestyle for you. I put clothes on your back. You owe me everything. You provided a luxury lifestyle for Madison. I corrected him sharply, pointing a finger at my sister, who was currently weeping into her napkin. You provided a carefully curated country club facade to impress your wealthy friends. You cut me off the literal minute I turned 18 because I refused to be a pawn in your financial games. You told me I was a useless burden, and you threw me out onto the street. And now you expect me to act like a loyal daughter and hand over a $4.5 million asset to a man who just committed grand larceny. Your hypocrisy is absolutely staggering. But the real question is why I continued leaning forward and staring intently at my parents. Why are you fighting so incredibly hard for Jamal? Yes, Madison is your golden child, but you are smart enough to know that tying yourselves to a man facing a federal indictment is social and financial suicide. You should be dragging Madison away from him. Yet here you are, Dad, physically destroying legal documents and risking obstruction of justice charges just to save your son-in-law. Jamal looked up, his eyes darting frantically between me and my father. Madison sniffled, wiping her mascara-stained cheeks, clearly completely lost in the escalating legal threats. But Catherine and Richard went completely rigid. The aggressive defensive posturing vanished in an instant, replaced by a sudden chilling stillness. You are terrified, I observed, analyzing their sudden shift in body language. You are not fighting for Jamal's career. You are fighting because if Jamal goes down, if his finances are completely audited and frozen by federal investigators, something else is going to be exposed. Something you are absolutely desperate to keep hidden from the authorities. Richard swallowed hard. His arrogant facade cracked entirely. He looked at Catherine, a silent communication of absolute panic passing between them. I watched their terror multiply, and I knew exactly what they were hiding. Because my lawyers had not just audited Jamal, we had audited the entire financial history of this family. David Thorne unzipped the secondary compartment of his leather briefcase. The sharp metallic sound echoed loudly in the suffocating silence of the private dining room. He withdrew a thick, professionally bound stack of financial dossiers, setting them down on the white linen tablecloth with deliberate precision. He did not hand them to Richard. He simply opened the top folder, revealing pages filled with highlighted bank statements, tax records, and corporate filings. When you presented a commercial loan guarantee, attempting to encumber my client's multi-million-dollar asset, David began, his voice maintaining that maddeningly calm, clinical cadence, you triggered a mandatory due diligence review. My firm does not simply evaluate the primary debtor. We evaluate all associated parties involved in the transaction. You brought this contract to the table, Richard. By doing so, you essentially handed us the keys to your entire financial history. Richard swallowed hard, his eyes fixed on the open dossier. The aggressive, domineering patriarch who had threatened to disown me just minutes ago was completely gone. He looked physically diminished, his broad shoulders slumping under his expensive suit jacket. You have absolutely no right to access our private banking records, Catherine hissed. Though her voice lacked its usual commanding volume, she clutched her pearl necklace so tightly I thought the string might snap. This is a massive violation of our privacy. We are wealthy, established citizens. Our financial portfolios are highly classified. Your financial portfolios are a complete and utter mirage, Mother, I stated, leaning back in my chair and studying her terrified expression. You are not wealthy. You are not established. You are completely underwater, and you have been running a desperate financial shell game for the past 5 years, just to maintain your country club membership. Madison looked frantically between me, David, and our parents. The heavy layers of delusion she wore like armor were finally beginning to crack. Mom, what is she talking about? Madison demanded, her voice shrill with rising panic. Tell her to stop lying. You just paid the deposit for our luxury villa on the Amalfi Coast. You said the family accounts were doing incredibly well. They cannot pay for a domestic flight to New Jersey, Madison, let alone a luxury villa in Italy, I fired back, keeping my eyes locked on my mother. Tell her, Catherine. Tell your golden child exactly how you managed to fund her fake influencer lifestyle. Tell her about the reverse mortgages. Catherine clamped her mouth shut, shaking her head in rapid, jerky movements. David smoothly turned a page in his dossier. According to the public property records and verified bank filings, Richard and Catherine currently have zero equity in their primary suburban estate. You have taken out 3 separate reverse mortgages on the property over the last 4 years. Your total liabilities currently exceed the market value of your home by approximately $400,000. Furthermore, Richard's primary corporate entity, which he claims is a highly successful enterprise, has defaulted on 2 major commercial loans in the past 18 months. You are entirely insolvent. The silence that followed was absolute. Jamal stared at the table, refusing to look at his in-laws. Madison looked like all the air had been sucked out of the room. Grandma Beatrice remained perfectly still at the end of the table, her hands resting quietly in her lap. "You are broke," Madison whispered the words, sounding foreign and ugly in her mouth. She stared at Richard, her eyes wide with a horrific realization. "Dad, you promised you were setting up a massive trust fund for my future children. You told me the family money was completely secure." "I was managing a temporary cash flow issue," Richard rasped, running a trembling hand over his face. He could not look at Madison. He could not look at anyone. "The market has been incredibly difficult to navigate. I took on some aggressive leverage to keep our lifestyle intact until my next business venture paid off. I was protecting the family." "You were protecting your own ego," I corrected him sharply. "You could not handle the humiliation of downsizing. You could not stomach the idea of your wealthy friends finding out you were a complete failure. So you borrowed money you could never pay back. But that is not even the darkest part of this pathetic story, is it, Dad? Because simply going bankrupt was not enough for you. You had to drag Jamal into your mess." I shifted my gaze to my brother-in-law. Jamal looked physically sick. His jaw clenched so tightly a muscle twitched rapidly in his cheek. "This is why you are fighting so incredibly hard to save a man facing federal felony charges," I said, putting the final pieces of the puzzle together for the room to see. "When Jamal married Madison, he thought he was marrying into a massive dynasty. But he is a financial analyst. It did not take him long to realize your empire was built entirely on bad credit and empty promises." Instead of running away, Jamal saw an opportunity. He realized he had 2 desperate, status-obsessed in-laws who would do absolutely anything to keep their financial ruin a secret. David tapped a specific spreadsheet in the dossier. We traced multiple wire transfers between Jamal's personal accounts and Richard's corporate holding company. When Richard's business began defaulting on its commercial loans, Jamal stepped in. He used his position at Apex Financial to help Richard falsify asset declarations. Jamal artificially inflated Richard's corporate valuation on paper, allowing Richard to secure fraudulent extensions on his impending defaults. "Shut up," Jamal begged, his voice a ragged, desperate whisper. He buried his face in his hands. "Please, just shut up. You are co-conspirators," I stated, my voice ringing with cold, lethal clarity. "Jamal helped you commit bank fraud, Dad. And in exchange, you turned a blind eye when Jamal started illegally margin trading to fund Madison's massive credit card debts. You built a twisted, highly illegal financial ecosystem where you constantly covered for each other's crimes." I watched the absolute terror paralyze my parents. The trap was now fully permanently closed. "That is why you brought this commercial loan guarantee to a birthday dinner." I continued, pointing at the shredded documents Richard had destroyed. "You did not just need my penthouse to save Jamal from his federal audit. You needed my penthouse because if the Securities and Exchange Commission formally investigates Jamal's trading accounts, they will subpoena every single electronic device, email, and bank record he possesses. They will find the paper trail connecting his financial manipulation directly to your failing business. If Jamal goes down for federal embezzlement, he is taking you and Mother down for corporate bank fraud right alongside him. You needed my $4.5 million asset to cover up a multifamily criminal conspiracy." Richard sank slowly back into his chair, the fight completely drained from his body. Catherine openly wept, her carefully constructed high society facade entirely obliterated. They were trapped in a financial web of their own making, and I held the only scissors in the room. The heavy silence in the private dining room was suddenly broken by the sharp scrape of a chair pushing back against the hardwood floor. Every eye snapped toward the right side of the table. Aunt Joanne, Richard's 55-year-old younger sister, carefully placed her linen napkin next to her untouched dessert plate. She had sat in absolute silence for the entire evening, observing the spectacular collapse of her brother's empire with a look of intense cold calculation. Joanne was a certified public accountant. For over a decade, she had managed the overarching financial portfolio for our extended family, handling everything from tax filings to asset allocation. That was until 5 years ago when Richard abruptly terminated her services, claiming her conservative investment strategies were holding the family back from true generational wealth. The reality which we were all about to learn was vastly different. "You fired me in the spring of 2019. Richard." Joanne stated, her voice slicing through the thick tension like a scalpel. Her tone held zero familial affection. It was the voice of an auditor closing in on a target. "You stood in my office, threw a folder of tax returns at my face, and called me incompetent because I explicitly refused to classify Madison's European vacations as deductible corporate marketing expenses for your failing holding company." Richard swallowed hard, a fresh wave of panic washing over his pale face. "Joanne, stay out of this. This is an internal dispute between me and my daughter. You have absolutely no business interfering right now." "I have every business interfering," Joanne countered sharply, standing up to her full height. "Because Naomi just laid out a brilliant forensic timeline of your recent corporate fraud with Jamal, but her lawyer missed one crucial piece of the puzzle. A massive glaring hole in your liquidity that has been keeping me awake at night for the past 4 months." Catherine let out a frantic, high-pitched gasp. She reached across the table, grabbing Richard's sleeve. "Richard, tell her to sit down. Tell her to stop talking immediately." "I will not sit down," Joanne snapped, fixing her sister-in-law with a stare of pure disgust. "You two have spent the last half-decade parading around the country club acting like absolute royalty while treating Naomi like garbage. You told the entire family that Naomi was a bitter, selfish child who abandoned her loving parents. Meanwhile, you were leveraging your own home into foreclosure and orchestrating federal bank fraud with your son-in-law. But that is not what I'm going to ask you about tonight." Joanne turned her gaze directly onto Richard. "I want to talk about the medical care accounts." The effect of those words on my parents was immediate and violent. Catherine physically recoiled, pressing her hands against her mouth as if trying to stifle a scream. Richard gripped the edge of the dining table so hard his knuckles turned completely white. He looked at Joanne with eyes wide with absolute primal terror. "Do not say another word," Richard hissed, his voice dropping to a dangerous, gravelly whisper. "I am warning you, Joanne. You keep your mouth shut." "What medical care accounts?" Madison asked, looking frantically between her father and her aunt. "Mom, what is she talking about?" "Your father is legally barred from answering that question." "Honestly," Joanne said, never breaking eye contact with Richard. "So I will ask the question for everyone here to hear. Richard, you just admitted to Naomi that you are completely insolvent. You have 3 reverse mortgages. Your corporate entity has defaulted on 2 major commercial loans. You are relying on Jamal to illegally falsify your asset declarations just to keep the bank from seizing your corporate properties. So please, explain the math to me." Joanne took a step closer to the table, her voice ringing with undeniable authority. "If you are entirely bankrupt and you have zero equity left to your name, how exactly have you been paying the $25,000 monthly maintenance fees for Grandma Beatrice's private Tier 1 medical trust?" The room plunged into a suffocating, terrifying stillness. Jamal, who had been staring at his shoes in sheer defeat, suddenly snapped his head up. He looked at Richard, his financial analyst brain rapidly crunching the numbers his aunt had just presented. "Wait a minute," Jamal said, his voice trembling, as a new layer of horror dawned on him. "A $25,000 monthly fee, that is $300,000 a year. Richard, you told me your liquid assets were tied up in a commercial development project in Chicago. You told me you needed me to inflate your corporate valuation because you were just waiting for an overseas escrow account to clear." "You idiot," Joanne scoffed, looking at Jamal with utter contempt. "There is no commercial development project in Chicago. My brother has not closed a legitimate real estate deal in 6 years. He has been bleeding cash to maintain Catherine's luxury shopping habits and Madison's ridiculous influencer facade." Catherine jumped up from her chair, tears streaming down her face, her carefully styled hair flying wildly. "Joanne, you are a jealous, spiteful woman. We have always provided the absolute best care for Beatrice. We established a secure medical trust for her a decade ago. The funds generate their own interest. Richard manages the trust perfectly. You are just trying to turn Beatrice against us. A secure medical trust, Joanne repeated, letting out a sharp, deeply cynical laugh. Yes, Catherine. Our late grandfather established a highly secure, high-yield medical trust for Beatrice 12 years ago. He explicitly designated Richard as the primary fiduciary executor. The initial principal of that trust was exactly $1.5 million. It was designed to guarantee that Beatrice would receive elite, round-the-clock medical care for the rest of her natural life without ever becoming a financial burden on the family. Joanne turned to me, her eyes locking onto mine with a look of grim confirmation. Naomi, your lawyer just audited Richard's holding company. I am assuming David pulled the public filings for all subsidiary accounts linked to Richard's social security number, correct? David Thorne nodded smoothly, adjusting his tailored suit jacket. We conducted a comprehensive sweep of all linked financial entities. He confirmed, his voice devoid of emotion. Then you already know the answer, Joanne said, turning her fierce gaze back to my father, the patriarch who had just spent an hour demanding respect, demanding loyalty, and demanding my $4.5 million penthouse. Richard, look me in the eye and tell this entire room the current liquid balance of your mother's medical trust. Richard could not speak. His mouth opened, but only a ragged, choking breath escaped. He looked at Grandma Beatrice, who was still sitting perfectly still at the end of the table, her expression completely unreadable. Tell them, Richard, Joanne demanded, slamming her hand on the table. Tell your golden child Madison exactly how you funded her lavish destination wedding. Tell Jamal where you got the collateral for the initial loans that you eventually defaulted on. He drained it, I said softly, the horrifying reality settling over the room like a thick layer of ice, the sheer depravity of their actions finally snapping perfectly into focus. I looked at my parents, feeling a level of disgust so profound it bordered on physical nausea. You drained Grandma Beatrice's medical trust, I stated, raising my voice so every single person in the private dining room could hear the absolute truth. You did not just commit bank fraud with Jamal, Dad. You committed elder abuse. You stole $1.5 million from your own mother's healthcare fund to pay for Madison's designer handbags and your own pathetic country club dues. No, Madison shrieked, pressing her hands over her ears as if she could physically block out the sound of the accusations. No, that is a lie. My dad is a successful businessman. He is a millionaire. He promised me a trust fund for my babies. You are all making this up to destroy my life. But the truth was undeniably written across Richard's terrified, pale face. He had absolutely nowhere left to hide. The financial web had collapsed, completely exposing the darkest, most unforgivable secret they possessed. And the target had shifted permanently onto the two people who truly deserved it. Joanne did not let the silence linger. She placed a simple, unadorned black ledger on the table right next to David's thick dossiers. The contrast between her modest notebook and my attorney's corporate files was stark, but the damage it contained was equally lethal. You thought you covered your tracks perfectly when you fired me, Richard. Joanne said, her voice echoing with years of suppressed rage. You assumed that because you hired some sketchy discount accountant to rubber stamp your tax returns, your creative accounting would remain buried forever. But you forgot one crucial detail. I was the original architect of Mother's Medical Trust. I know exactly how those accounts were structured, and I know exactly what triggers an automatic alert to the primary beneficiaries. Catherine let out a pathetic whimper, burying her face in her hands. She was trembling so violently her pearl necklace rattled against her collarbone. Let us walk through the timeline of your absolute moral bankruptcy. Joanne continued, opening the black ledger and running her finger down a column of handwritten dates. 5 years ago, you convinced Mother to grant you full power of attorney over her estate. You told her you needed to diversify her medical trust to protect her assets against inflation. You sat in her living room, held her hands, and promised you would safeguard her future. Richard squeezed his eyes shut, shaking his head in a desperate, silent plea for his sister to stop talking. Joanne ignored him completely. Instead of diversifying the portfolio, you routed the principal balance into a dummy corporation. You named Blackwell Strategic Holdings. Joanne stated, her voice sharp and unforgiving. You stripped the high-yield bonds. You liquidated the mutual funds. You took $1.5 million explicitly designated for a woman requiring specialized memory care, and you treated it like your own personal piggy bank. Jamal pushed his chair back, his breathing ragged. He stared at Richard as if he were looking at a ghost. You stole from an old woman, Jamal whispered, his voice cracking with sheer disbelief. You told me your wealth was generational. You told me you built a real estate empire. He did build an empire, Jamal, I interjected, keeping my tone perfectly level. An empire of absolute fraud. And he used you to keep the foundation from collapsing. But do not pretend you are just an innocent bystander. Let Aunt Joanne finish explaining exactly where that stolen medical money went. Because you and Madison were the primary beneficiaries of this felony. Madison raised her head, her face a smeared mess of expensive makeup and terror. No, Madison cried out, her voice frantic. We had nothing to do with that. Mom and Dad gave us money as gifts. They said it was from their investments. I did not know anything about a medical trust. Joanne flipped a page in her ledger, her expression turning to pure disgust. Do not insult my intelligence, Madison. You think a $200,000 destination wedding on the Amalfi Coast pays for itself. You think your father just magically found $80,000 in cash to buy you a brand new BMW convertible. Every single luxury you have flaunted for the past 5 years was funded by your grandmother's healthcare money. Catherine slammed her hands on the table, her face flushed with desperate, ugly defiance. Beatrice did not need that money right now, Catherine screamed, completely abandoning any pretense of innocence. She is perfectly healthy. She sits in her house all day. We are her family. We deserve to enjoy some of our inheritance while we could actually appreciate it. We were going to pay it back as soon as Richard's commercial developments closed. We were just borrowing it. Borrowing it, I repeated, genuinely repulsed by her sheer audacity. You drained a medical trust fund to buy designer handbags and country club memberships. You treated an 80-year-old woman's security net like a slush fund for your vanity. Grandma Beatrice has a degenerative condition, Mother. Specialized memory care facilities cost upwards of $20,000 a month in this country. Without that trust, she would be forced into a state-run facility the moment her health declines. You were willing to throw your own mother-in-law into a substandard nursing home just so Madison could post wedding photos from Italy. I did not know, Madison wailed, grabbing Jamal's arm. Jamal, you have to believe me. I thought they were rich. I did not know they were stealing. David Thorne leaned forward, adjusting his glasses. Actually, Madison, ignorance is not a viable legal defense in this particular situation, my attorney stated calmly. Because Richard needed a legal mechanism to move the stolen trust funds into your accounts without triggering federal gift tax audits. So he classified you as a strategic consultant for Blackwell Strategic Holdings. Madison froze, her eyes darting frantically between David and her father. A consultant. What does that mean? It means, David explained smoothly, that for the past 4 years, you have been signing W-2 forms and tax documents acknowledging the receipt of those stolen funds as corporate compensation. You committed tax fraud, Madison. You actively participated in a money laundering scheme. You signed federal documents legally binding yourself to a dummy corporation funded entirely by elder abuse. Jamal yanked his arm away from Madison as if her touch burned him. He stood up from the table, stumbling backward. His chest heaved as he processed the absolute catastrophe of his marriage. You signed corporate tax forms without reading them, Jamal shouted at his wife, his voice echoing loudly across the room. Dad told me to sign them, Madison sobbed, pointing a shaking finger at Richard. He said it was just family business stuff. He said it was for taxes. I do not know anything about corporate holdings. You are a complete idiot. Jamal roared, his Wall Street arrogance entirely replaced by the frantic panic of a man facing a lengthy prison sentence. We filed joint taxes, Madison. When you signed those fraudulent W-2 forms, you tied me to a money laundering operation. I am already under federal investigation by the SEC for margin trading, and you just anchored me to a massive elder abuse conspiracy. Jamal paced back and forth, clutching his head in his hands. He looked at Richard and Catherine with pure, unadulterated hatred. You set me up, Jamal spat. You paraded around like billionaires dangling trust funds and inheritances in my face. You made me think I was marrying into elite society, but you are nothing but common thieves. You used my financial credentials to falsify your asset declarations, and you used my wife to launder money you stole from a dying woman. We were protecting our legacy, Richard bellowed, standing up to face Jamal. We did what we had to do to survive in this economy. You gladly took our money when it paid for your luxury apartment lease, Jamal. You happily wore the expensive watches we bought you. Do not stand there and act like you have the moral high ground. You are a crooked analyst who lost nearly $1 million of client money. You belong in this family. The private dining room had descended into absolute chaos. The alliances they had so carefully constructed against me were fracturing violently. They were no longer a unified front demanding my compliance. They were a den of thieves turning on each other the exact moment the lights were turned on. I sat back and watched them tear each other apart, feeling a deep cathartic sense of justice. The financial web they had spun to trap me had instead become their own personal prison. Jamal turned his back on Richard and marched directly toward Madison. The veins in his neck bulged against his stiff collar. He pointed a shaking finger right at her face, ignoring the tears ruining her heavy makeup. You are a complete fraud. Jamal spat, his voice dripping with venom. You sat in my apartment 2 years ago and told me you were an independent brand ambassador with a massive trust fund waiting for you. You let me finance the expensive engagement ring on a high-interest loan because you promised your father would buy us a luxury townhouse as a wedding gift. Where is that townhouse, Madison? Where is the generational wealth you bragged about to all my colleagues? Madison shrank back against the wall, crossing her arms defensively over her chest. I did not lie to you, she sobbed, her voice high and desperate. I thought the money was real. Dad promised me it was real. You cannot blame me for this, Jamal. I am your wife. We are supposed to be a team. A team. Jamal let out a harsh, echoing laugh that sounded completely unhinged. We have never been a team. You treat our marriage like a prop for your social media accounts. You demanded I buy you a $10,000 designer bag for our anniversary, knowing I was struggling to meet my margin calls. You took my credit cards and maxed them out on luxury skincare routines and staged vacations because you are obsessed with looking wealthy online. You bled me dry, Madison. You bled me completely dry, and you did it using money your parents stole from your own grandmother. Catherine tried to intervene, stepping between them. Jamal, please, you are terrifying her. Madison is innocent in this. She is just a victim of circumstance. She is a parasite, Jamal roared, refusing to back down. He glared at Catherine with absolute contempt. She is exactly like you, entitled, lazy, and completely obsessed with status. I compromised my entire career to keep this family afloat. I risked a federal indictment because Madison cried every single night about how humiliating it would be to downsize to a cheaper apartment. Madison's sorrow evaporated, instantly replaced by a vicious defensive rage. She shoved her mother aside and stepped right up to Jamal. Do not put this on me, she screamed, jabbing her finger. You wanted this lifestyle just as much as I did. You loved dropping my family name to get a better table. You loved showing off to your Wall Street friends, pretending you married into a dynasty. You used me, Jamal. You are just as fake as I am. Jamal stared at her, his expression twisting into absolute disgust. I want a divorce, he stated. I am filing the papers tomorrow morning. You and your criminal parents can rot in federal prison together. I am done. Madison stood frozen for a fraction of a second before her entire body began to shake. The threat of divorce did not break her. It ignited a level of vicious hostility I had never seen from her before. She lunged forward, shoving Jamal hard in the chest with both hands. You are done! Madison shrieked, her voice echoing shrilly across the private dining room. You do not get to walk away from me and play the victim, Jamal. You are not a victim. You are a toxic, parasitic loser who bled my parents completely dry long before today. Jamal stumbled backward, caught off guard by her intense physical aggression. He glared at her, his fists clenched tightly at his sides. You are a psychotic woman, Madison. I kept this entire family afloat. You kept us afloat, Madison let out a loud, mocking laugh that sounded utterly unhinged. You sank us, Jamal. Dad had to drain Grandma Beatrice's medical trust because of you. Do you think I forgot about your pathetic tech startups? You played the hotshot venture capitalist and convinced my father to hand over $500,000 to fund your stupid crypto trading platform 2 years ago. the platform that went completely bankrupt in less than 6 months. Dad had to raid the trust fund just to cover the enormous financial losses you directly generated. Catherine gasped, looking frantically between her daughter and her son-in-law. Madison, please, we promise never to discuss the startup money in front of anyone. I do not care anymore, Mom. Madison snapped, turning her furious gaze back to Jamal. He wants to stand here and call me a fraud. Let us talk about his hidden gambling debts. Tell everyone, Jamal. Tell Naomi and her fancy lawyer exactly why you really needed to illegally margin trade client funds. It was not just to pay for my credit cards. It was to cover your massive losses with offshore sports betting syndicates. You are a degenerate gambler who owes hundreds of thousands of dollars to very dangerous bookies. Jamal lunged forward, aggressively grabbing Madison by the shoulders. Shut your mouth right now. You are going to ruin me. Get your hands off her. Richard bellowed, finally springing into action and shoving Jamal forcefully away from Madison. Do not ever lay a hand on my daughter. Your daughter is a spoiled brat who just confessed to a room full of witnesses that we committed wire fraud to cover my personal gambling debts. Jamal shouted back, his face contorted in absolute sheer panic. He turned to me, his eyes wild with total desperation. Naomi, you cannot let them pin this all on me. Richard was the ultimate mastermind. He structured the illegal dummy corporations. He transferred the protected medical funds. I just signed the paperwork he forced in front of me. They completely manipulated me into doing this. Madison sneered at him, crossing her arms tightly over her chest. You are absolutely pathetic, Jamal. You are going to federal prison, and I am going to make sure the judge knows you manipulated my poor, desperate father into funding your severe gambling addiction. You are finished. A sharp, clear sound pierced the toxic atmosphere of the private dining room. Ding, ding, ding. Everyone froze, turning toward the end of the long mahogany table. Grandma Beatrice was calmly tapping a silver spoon against her crystal water glass. The blank, vacant stare she had carefully maintained for the past 2 years was completely gone. In its place was a look of absolute terrifying clarity. Sit down, all of you, Grandma Beatrice commanded. Her voice did not waver. It did not hold the fragile tremor of an old woman suffering from cognitive decline. It rang with the sharp, authoritative cadence of a woman who had just watched her descendants gladly dig their own financial graves. Richard blinked, stepping away from Jamal. Mother, you should not be listening to this. This is complicated adult business. You need to rest. Let me call your nurse to take you back to the facility. I do not need a nurse, Richard, Grandma Beatrice replied, setting the spoon down on the table. And I certainly do not need to go back to that facility. I packed my bags yesterday morning. I will not be returning to the mediocre care home you dumped me in, so you could siphon my medical trust to pay for Jamal's offshore gambling debts and Madison's ridiculous vacations. Catherine gasped, clutching her chest tightly. Beatrice, you are confused. Your memory condition is acting up again. We are protecting you. Do not ever insult my intelligence again, Catherine, Grandma. Beatrice snapped, her eyes flashing with pure fury. I do not have a memory condition. I had a severe reaction to a misprescribed medication 2 years ago. I was temporarily disoriented, but when my mind cleared, I realized my own son was using my vulnerability to seize total legal control over my finances. Madison stared at her grandmother, her mouth hanging open. You faked being sick. I chose to remain quiet, Madison. Grandma Beatrice clarified, looking at her spoiled granddaughter with deep disappointment. I played the role of the silent, declining matriarch because I needed to see exactly what this family would do when they thought nobody was watching. And what you did was absolutely despicable. Grandma Beatrice slowly stood up. She did not use her cane. She stood tall, projecting a formidable presence that instantly dwarfed Richard's fading authority. A year ago, I noticed discrepancies in my monthly care statements, Grandma Beatrice explained. The facility you placed me in was substandard, yet the billing statements showed massive withdrawals from my medical trust. I knew you were stealing from me, Richard. But I also knew that if I confronted you directly, you would use your power of attorney to legally declare me incompetent and lock me away permanently. Richard opened his mouth to deny it, but no words came out. He was staring at his mother as if she had just risen from the dead. So I made a phone call. Grandma Beatrice continued, gesturing toward my side of the table. I called the only person in this family who actually understands the value of hard work and basic human decency. I called Naomi. The entire room turned to look at me. I simply nodded, taking a quiet sip of my water. Naomi did not dismiss me, Grandma Beatrice said proudly. She brought David Thorne to visit me under the guise of being a new medical specialist. David quietly revoked your power of attorney, Richard. We legally established a new, highly secure trust structure. And then we hired a team of elite forensic accountants to trace every single dollar you, Catherine Madison, and Jamal stole from my accounts. Jamal slumped heavily against the wall, clutching his chest. You have been building a case against us for a year, he wheezed, his voice filled with sheer terror. For exactly 14 months, David Thorne confirmed. We traced the wire transfers to your offshore betting syndicates, Jamal. We compiled every fraudulent tax return Madison signed. We documented every commercial loan application Richard submitted, using stolen assets as collateral. Why? Catherine sobbed, falling to her knees right there on the restaurant floor. Why would you do this to us? Beatrice, we are your family. We love you. You love my money, Grandma Beatrice corrected her coldly. You sat at this table tonight and tried to force Naomi to sacrifice her entire livelihood just to save yourselves from the consequences of your own greed. You are not a family. You are a criminal enterprise. Richard fell into his chair, covering his face with his hands. He was crying now, loud, ugly, desperate sobs. Mother, please. I am your son. I will pay it back. I will sell everything. Just do not go to the police. I cannot go to prison. I will not survive in prison. You should have thought about that before you stole my healthcare fund to finance a luxury car for a daughter who refuses to work. Grandma Beatrice said, her voice devoid of any maternal warmth. But you are too late, Richard. I did not invite you to this 80th birthday dinner to listen to you argue. I invited you here so I could watch you face justice. Richard tried to reach out, his hand shaking as he grasped the edge of the table. Mother, you cannot hand your own son over to the authorities. The scandal will destroy the family name. The press will crucify us. We will be ruined in the public eye. The family name was ruined the moment you decided theft was an acceptable business strategy, Grandma Beatrice replied with glacial calm. You destroyed the name Richard. I am merely ensuring the infection stops here. Grandma Beatrice looked at David Thorne. David nodded and checked his watch. It was exactly 8:15. The federal authorities already have the entire dossier. David announced, his voice ringing with absolute finality. The FBI and the Securities and Exchange Commission formally received the complete forensic accounting reports at 5 o'clock this afternoon. They spent the last 3 hours obtaining the necessary warrants. Your personal and corporate bank accounts are officially frozen. The federal prosecutors are currently drafting the indictments for wire fraud, bank fraud, tax evasion, and elder abuse. Madison screamed, a horrific, piercing sound of absolute despair. She threw herself onto the floor next to Catherine, burying her face in her mother's lap. I am going to jail, Madison wailed. I cannot go to jail. I am an influencer. They will take my phone. They will take my clothes. Jamal did not scream. He simply slid down the wall until he was sitting on the floor, his head resting between his knees, entirely unresponsive to the chaos around him. The reality of his destroyed career and impending incarceration had finally broken his mind. Grandma Beatrice looked down at her son, her daughter-in-law, and her golden grandchild, all weeping on the floor of a private dining room in Manhattan. She did not shed a single tear. You made your choices, Grandma Beatrice stated, her voice echoing with the heavy, undeniable weight of absolute judgment. You chose greed over loyalty. You chose appearances over integrity. And you chose to abuse the two people in this family who actually cared about you. Tonight you face the absolute and unavoidable consequences of your actions. The silence following. Grandma Beatrice's declaration was shattered by the sound of heavy fabric hitting the hardwood floor. Richard, a man who had spent his entire adult life demanding obedience and projecting absolute superiority, physically collapsed onto his knees. He crawled forward, his expensive suit trousers catching on shattered glass. He reached out his trembling hands, grasping desperately at the hem of my dress. Naomi, please, Richard begged, his voice stripped of all pride, reduced to a pathetic, guttural whine. You have to stop this. You know these people. You have the best corporate lawyers in the city. Tell David to call the federal prosecutors. Tell them it was a misunderstanding. I will give you everything. I will sign over the holding company to you tonight. You can have absolute control over all my corporate assets. I will make you the sole managing director. Just make the indictments go away. I stepped back, forcing him to release my dress. I looked down at him with an expression of pure, unadulterated ice. Give me your corporate assets, I asked, my voice slicing through his frantic sobbing. You have zero corporate assets, Dad. Your holding company is a heavily leveraged shell corporation, currently bleeding thousands of dollars a day in defaulted loan penalties. Taking over your company would be assuming a massive financial liability. I run a highly profitable real estate empire. I do not acquire toxic debt. Your offer is entirely worthless, just like your business acumen. Catherine crawled across the floor to join him. She grabbed my ankles, sobbing uncontrollably. Naomi, we are your parents! Catherine cried, her voice echoing shrilly across the private dining room. We gave you life. You cannot send the people who raised you to a federal prison. I will give you my jewelry. I will give you the vintage cars. I will sell every designer gown I own to pay back the medical trust. We will move into a small apartment. We will do whatever you want. Please show some mercy. You have always been the stronger sister. Madison cannot survive this. She is too fragile. You have to save her. You are offering to sell depreciating luxury goods to cover a $1.5 million federal theft, I noted, shaking my head. And you are still sitting on your knees facing federal prison time, asking me to save Madison. You stole from a dying woman to fund a fake internet lifestyle, and your only concern is protecting the golden child who happily spent the stolen cash. My mercy ran out the exact moment you locked me out of the house 15 years ago. Suddenly, a loud, aggressive scuffle erupted on the other side of the room. Jamal scrambled up from the floor, his eyes wild, darting frantically around the room as his survival instincts finally overpowered his panic. He looked at Richard and Catherine weeping on the floor, then looked at Madison, who was paralyzed by shock. He stepped away from Madison, putting physical distance between himself and his wife. He pointed a sharp, accusing finger directly at her face. I had absolutely no idea where the money was coming from, Jamal shouted, addressing David Thorne and the room at large. I am a victim of this family's extreme financial manipulation. Madison lied to me from the very beginning. She completely misrepresented her net worth. She told me the wire transfers from Richard's holding company were legitimate consulting fees. I never saw the medical trust documents. I never spoke to Beatrice. Madison forged my signature on the joint tax returns. She committed the tax fraud, not me. Madison gasped, her eyes widening in absolute horror as her husband threw her directly under a speeding bus to save his own Wall Street career. Jamal, what are you doing? Madison shrieked, reaching out for him. You helped Dad set up the dummy corporations. You told him exactly how to route the money to avoid triggering an audit. You are the financial analyst. I was giving generic financial advice, Jamal roared, backing away from her as if she were carrying a plague. I never authorized the transfer of protected medical funds. You and your corrupt father orchestrated the entire embezzlement scheme. You manipulated me into this. You used my credentials to legitimize your family's theft. I am willing to testify immediately. I will give the federal prosecutors everything they need on Richard and Catherine. I will turn state's evidence right now in exchange for full immunity. You miserable coward, Madison screamed, lunging at Jamal with her manicured claws extended. You lost nearly $1 million of your client's money betting on illegal options. You begged my father to bail you out. You knew exactly where that money came from, and you gladly spent it on custom suits and expensive watches. Jamal easily shoved Madison away. I am a cooperating witness, Jamal yelled, looking desperately at David Thorne. You need to tell the SEC that I am a cooperating witness. I was coerced by a wealthy family into masking their crimes. I can provide the exact IP addresses Richard used to wire the stolen medical funds. I will give you his passwords. Just keep me out of federal prison. I watched Jamal attempt to weaponize his own betrayal, desperately trying to trade his wife and in-laws for a lighter sentence. His absolute lack of loyalty was truly staggering. You are not a cooperating witness, Jamal. I stated, my voice echoing with lethal finality. You are the primary suspect in an unauthorized margin trading investigation. The federal authorities already have the IP addresses. They already have the passwords. They do not need your cooperation, because my forensic accountants already did all the heavy lifting. You have absolutely zero leverage to trade. You are just a disgraced analyst who got caught stealing from his firm and his grandmother-in-law. Jamal stared at me, his chest heaving as the last remaining exit door slammed firmly shut in his face. The atmosphere in the private dining room had shifted from a volatile war zone into a sterile, suffocating tomb. I looked at the four of them, a pathetic tableau of greed completely collapsing under the weight of federal law. My father remained on the floor. My mother wept openly. Madison stared at the wall in catatonic shock, and Jamal was completely paralyzed by his destroyed future. I reached for my designer clutch resting near my wine glass. I snapped the gold clasp shut, the sharp sound acting as the final gavel striking down their fraudulent empire. I slowly stood up, smoothing the front of my midnight blue silk dress. I did not feel a single ounce of guilt. I felt the profound, absolute satisfaction of a woman who had finally excised a terminal tumor from her life. David Thorne closed his thick leather dossiers, securing the financial evidence back into his briefcase. He stood beside me, radiating professional detachment. Grandma Beatrice carefully adjusted her pearl cardigan and gripped the edge of the table, pulling herself up to her full height. The three of us stood unified, a wall of absolute financial and moral superiority, looking down at the wreckage. Just as we turned toward the heavy oak doors of the private dining room, the restaurant manager nervously stepped inside. He held a sleek black leather folder containing the evening check. He hesitated, looking at the broken glass on the floor, the overturned chair, and my parents kneeling on the carpet. The manager cleared his throat, holding the leather folder out tentatively. "I apologize for the interruption," he murmured, clearly desperate to exit the room as quickly as humanly possible. "I have the bill for the evening." Richard scrambled up from the floor, leaning heavily against the table. His face was a mask of desperate pride. He reached out to snatch the leather folder from the manager, trying to salvage one final shred of his patriarch persona. He opened the folder and his bloodshot eyes scanned the total. $5,420. Richard muttered, his voice hoarse. He glared at me, attempting to summon his previous authority. "You order the most expensive vintage champagne on the menu, Naomi, and you let us rack up this massive bill. You are going to pay this right now. You owe this restaurant. You are the CEO of a multi-million-dollar firm. Take care of this tab immediately so we can leave this establishment with some dignity." I let out a sharp, incredulous laugh. "Dignity?" I asked, genuinely amused. "You lost your dignity the moment you tried to extort your own daughter to cover up a federal felony, Dad." Furthermore, I did not order the vintage champagne. Madison ordered 3 bottles of Reserve Dom Perignon because she wanted to post a celebratory toast on her fake Instagram account after forcing me to sign over my penthouse. You ordered the imported caviar and the Wagyu to celebrate your successful shakedown. I drank exactly 1 glass of Cabernet and ate a side salad. I am absolutely not paying for your celebratory feast." Richard sneered, reaching into his tailored suit jacket and pulling out a heavy metal American Express black card. "You are a cheap, petty girl," Richard spat, throwing the prestigious card onto the silver tray the manager was holding. "Charge the full amount to this account. And add a 20% tip. I will not have these people thinking the Blackwell family cannot afford a simple dinner." The manager nodded quickly and practically sprinted out of the room to process the payment. "You see," Catherine said, pulling herself up from the floor and attempting to straighten her ruined dress, "your father is still a wealthy man. We will recover from this. We will hire defense attorneys. We will fight these ridiculous allegations. We still have resources." I just stared at her, feeling a deep, profound pity for her absolute financial ignorance. Less than 2 minutes later, the manager returned. His face was completely pale, and he looked incredibly uncomfortable. He held the black metal card out to Richard. "I am terribly sorry, sir," the manager said, his voice dropping to a low, apologetic whisper. "But your card has been declined." "Declined?" Richard roared, snatching the card back. "That is impossible. That account has no limit. Run it again. The machine must be broken." "I assure you the terminal is functioning perfectly, sir." the manager replied, taking a step backward. The merchant code specifically cited a severe status block. The account has been suspended by the issuing institution. Richard frantically dug into his wallet, pulling out a Chase Sapphire Reserve card and a Platinum Discover card. He threw both of them onto the tray. Run these. Run both of them. Split the check. Do whatever you have to do. The manager took the cards and scurried away again. Madison stood up, wiping her running mascara. Dad, what is happening? Why are your cards declining? Give them the corporate account card. Jamal let out a loud, miserable groan from his spot against the wall. You truly are a complete idiot, Madison, Jamal said, shaking his head in absolute despair. Did you not listen to a single word her attorney just said 10 minutes ago? The manager returned this time, accompanied by a burly security guard. I am sorry, sir, the manager announced, his tone now entirely devoid of hospitality. Both of those secondary cards have also triggered fraud alerts and immediate suspension holds. I need another form of payment immediately, or I will be forced to contact the authorities for theft of services. Richard patted his pockets, frantically pulling out his checkbook. I will write a check. I will write a check from my primary business account right now. You can write a check for $100 million, Dad, I stated coldly, shattering his frantic scrambling. It will bounce before it even hits the clearinghouse. Richard froze, staring at me with wild, terrified eyes. What did you do? I did not do anything, I reminded him. The United States federal government did. I explicitly told you that the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Securities and Exchange Commission executed their warrants at exactly 5 o'clock this evening. When federal agencies launch a coordinated strike on a massive money laundering and wire fraud conspiracy, they do not just send a politely worded email. They execute a comprehensive asset freeze. David Thorne stepped forward, delivering the precise legal reality. Every single bank account tied to your Social Security numbers has been completely locked by federal mandate, David explained. Your personal checking accounts, your corporate holdings, your investment portfolios, and every single line of credit you possess. They are all completely frozen. You have absolutely zero liquidity. You cannot access a single dollar. Catherine let out a horrified shriek, clutching her designer handbag against her chest, as if the feds were going to storm the restaurant and snatch it from her hands. We have no money, Catherine sobbed. How are we supposed to get home? How are we supposed to pay this bill? Madison frantically dug into her own purse, pulling out her wallet. Here, Madison cried out, tossing a stack of credit cards onto the table. Use mine. Use my influencer accounts. Jamal let out another bitter, hopeless laugh. Your cards have been maxed out for 6 months, Madison. You have $150,000 in debt. Your cards will decline faster than his. The manager and the security guard stepped closer to the table, looking incredibly menacing. We require a valid form of payment right now, the manager demanded, crossing his arms. $5,420. Otherwise, the police will be waiting for you outside the establishment. Richard looked at me, his eyes wide with absolute begging desperation. Naomi, please, you have to pay this. You cannot let them arrest us for a restaurant bill. We are your family. Please just pay the tab. I will do anything. I looked at the 4 of them. The golden child who mocked my career. The brother-in-law who threatened to destroy my business. The mother who called me a stain on the family name. The father who stole my college fund and demanded my penthouse. I stepped toward the door, Grandma Beatrice and David Thorne right beside me. I looked back over my shoulder one last time. I am not paying your bill, I said, my voice echoing with pure absolute finality. You ordered the feast. You face the consequences. Good luck washing dishes to pay off that vintage champagne. I turned and walked out through the heavy doors of the private dining room. David Thorne and Grandma Beatrice flanked me perfectly. We did not look back. As we exited the restaurant into the crisp Manhattan evening, I could hear the muffled sounds of Richard shouting from inside the building. His panicked roars were followed by the wail of approaching police sirens. The restaurant manager had clearly made good on his threat. The illusion of my family's elite status shattered entirely on the sidewalk of Midtown, replaced by handcuffs, unpaid bills, and absolute public humiliation. 6 months passed since that explosive night at Le Bernardin. The federal justice system moves with terrifying efficiency when presented with a perfectly packaged forensic audit. Richard and Catherine were officially indicted on multiple federal counts of wire fraud, bank fraud, tax evasion, and felony elder abuse. They tried to fight the charges, initially hiring a discount defense attorney because their frozen assets left them unable to afford premium legal representation. Their social circle completely abandoned them overnight. The country club revoked their membership immediately. Friends who used to attend their lavish dinner parties stopped returning their calls, treating them like a contagious disease. When the federal prosecutors presented the overwhelming financial evidence my team provided, their discount lawyer begged them to take a plea deal. Last Tuesday, I read the official press release. Richard was sentenced to 8 years in a federal penitentiary. Catherine received 5 years for her active complicity. The house they remortgaged 3 times was seized and sold at auction to cover a commercial debts. The fallout for Madison and Jamal was equally catastrophic. Their toxic marriage instantly disintegrated into a vicious, highly public legal war. Jamal desperately tried to secure immunity by testifying against my parents, but the Securities and Exchange Commission had zero interest in cutting deals with a rogue analyst. Jamal was permanently stripped of his financial licenses, heavily fined, and sentenced to 3 years for unauthorized margin trading and the misappropriation of client funds. His arrogant Wall Street career was completely eradicated. Madison filed for divorce. She filed for total bankruptcy, citing $150,000 in insurmountable credit card debt. Her fake influencer career collapsed overnight when the true nature of her wealth was exposed in local business blogs. She tried calling my office once, leaving a desperate voicemail begging for a job, which I promptly deleted. The last I heard, the former golden child of the family was working 40 hours a week as a receptionist at a budget car rental agency, living in a cramped studio apartment and taking public transit. She finally got the taste of the real world she so desperately needed. As for me, I stood on the expansive wrap-around balcony of my Tribeca penthouse, a glass of vintage Cabernet in my hand. The New York City skyline glittered around me, an endless sea of lights, reflecting the empire I built with my own 2 hands. The cool evening breeze carried the distinct feeling of absolute freedom. The heavy, suffocating weight of my toxic family was permanently lifted from my shoulders. I was no longer the scapegoat. I was no longer the ungrateful daughter they discarded at 18. I was the architect of my own destiny. The sliding glass door opened behind me. Grandma Beatrice stepped out onto the terrace, moving easily without the cane she used to carry just for show. She held her own glass of sparkling water, looking out at the magnificent view of the city. We had officially moved her into the guest wing of the penthouse, employing a top-tier private medical staff to provide her with the elite care she truly deserved. The stolen money from her trust was slowly being recovered through the liquidation of my parents' seized assets, but more importantly, she was entirely safe from their greed.